I used to think that secrets in my family came in whispers, hidden glances, quiet sighs, and unspoken tension behind forced smiles. But that night, at the grand dining room table of my grandparents' estate, one question didn't just whisper, it detonated. My name is Ava Monroe. I'm 32 years old, an independent interior designer living modestly in Portland. I've spent most of my life walking on eggshells around my mother's family people who hosted galas for charity but gave me side eyes over dinner. My mother, Nancy, raised me alone. And despite her constant warnings never to speak of my father, a small part of me always wondered who he was, why he left, why his name was never spoken. For the past year and a half, I've been receiving $5,000 each month from someone I only knew as our AIH. It started after a project I worked on went unexpectedly viral. I thought it was a mysterious investor, impressed with my work, choosing to support my growth. I never questioned it, maybe I didn't want to. That money saved my studio and helped me pay off debt. But I never told anyone about it, especially not my family. And then came that night. The night my mother forced me to attend Grandpa's 75th birthday dinner. The night the man at the head of the table, a guest no one seemed to know, lifted his glass and said, "Ava, is the $5,000 I send you every month enough?" Everything stopped. Forks froze midair, eyes turned toward me like searchlights, and just like that, the perfectly staged illusion my family had built around me began to unravel fast, loud, and impossible to ignore. When my mother called to summon me to my grandfather's 75th birthday dinner, I already felt the tension tightening in my chest. "It's important that you show up, Ava," she said, in that clipped, practiced voice she reserved for family functions and forced civility. "Everyone will be there." Her words didn't carry warmth, they never did, but they carried pressure. They always did. Growing up in the Monroe family meant being well-dressed, well-mannered, and, above all, well-contained. We wore silk gloves over bruised egos and smiled through gritted teeth. The Monroe estate sat like a fortress in the hills outside Seattle, all white columns, manicured hedges, and the kind of cold elegance that made you straighten your back whether you wanted to or not. It wasn't a house that welcomed emotion, it was a stage, and I'd long stopped playing a role on it. Still, I agreed to come. Maybe because a part of me was tired of avoiding them. Maybe because I knew if I didn't, they'd spend the entire evening talking about my absence instead. I chose a simple navy dress, tied my curls back, and took a deep breath before pulling into the long, circular driveway of the estate. Inside, everything was exactly as I remembered, flawless and hollow. Crystal chandeliers reflected against marble floors. The scent of fresh-cut lilies mingled with the faint aroma of roast beef and truffle oil wafting in from the kitchen. My grandmother, Vivian Monroe, greeted me at the door with a practiced smile that stopped just short of touching her eyes. "Darling Ava," she said, air-kissing my cheek. "Still doing that. What is it?" "Decorating business, interior design," I replied smoothly. "Yes, my firm just expanded. We took on a hotel renovation in Portland." "Oh, how ambitious," she murmured, then drifted away before I could respond. Typical. My cousins were already there, dressed to impress, their conversations buzzing with vacation plans and investment returns. No one asked me how I was. Not really. They asked about Portland's weather or traffic or if I still drove that little hybrid. Every question was surface level, designed more to fill time than to invite truth. Then I saw him. Standing by the grand piano near the bar, sipping from a lowball glass, was a man I didn't recognize. Older, maybe early 60s, with silver-streaked dark hair and the kind of calm, commanding presence you couldn't ignore. He wore a tailored gray suit and a quiet confidence that made him seem separate from the crowd, almost like he was watching it all with quiet amusement. "Who's that?" I whispered to my cousin Claire. She shrugged. "No clue. Probably one of Grandpa's golf buddies. He invited half his club." But something tugged at the back of my mind. There was something familiar in his posture, the way he tilted his head slightly when someone spoke to him, like he was studying them. I didn't know his name, but I had seen him before twice. In fact, once at a design expo in San Francisco, where I thought I'd caught him looking at my booth, but he disappeared before I could place him. Another time, months later, near my office in Portland, I assumed it was coincidence. Now I wasn't so sure. As we moved to the dining room, I found myself seated 3 chairs down from him, just opposite my mother. She didn't acknowledge him, not even a glance, but I noticed the slight twitch in her jaw when she realized he'd be at the table. My grandfather, ever the patriarch, raised his glass to 75 years of success. "Family and legacy," he declared, eyes shining with self-importance. The meal began, prime rib, roasted vegetables, duck confit, elegant excess on every plate. Conversation flowed easily around me, none of it directed at me. I mostly listened until the man next to Grandpa spoke. "Ava," he said, lifting his glass casually, "is the $5,000 I send you every month enough?" My fork stopped midair. For a second, I wasn't even sure I'd heard correctly. But silence spread like wildfire. Heads turned, eyes locked on me, and I saw it panic in my mother's expression. Real, visible panic. I looked at him, stunned. And for the first time, I saw it clearly. His eyes. They were mine. My breath caught. All the ambient noise in the room, the soft clinking of glasses, the low hum of conversation vanished under a blanket of stunned silence. I looked straight into the eyes of the man who had just casually revealed the secret I'd guarded for over a year. The same eyes that stared back at me in the mirror when I was unsure of myself. Eyes that had always made me feel different from the rest of my family. And now I knew why. The color drained from my mother's face so fast I thought she might faint. Her wineglass trembled slightly in her hand, her fingers white from the grip. "What did you just say?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He set down his glass slowly, gracefully. "The monthly deposit. From R.H. Enterprises. I assumed you knew it was from me." He said it so plainly, like it wasn't a bomb dropped in the center of a pristine ballroom. My mother let out a nervous laugh. "There must be some mistake," she said quickly. "Ava doesn't receive any such thing." I looked directly at her. "Yes, I do." Her lips pressed into a thin line, her composure wobbling. Grandpa cleared his throat at the head of the table. "I wasn't aware Richard Hawthorne had a business relationship with our family," he said stiffly, avoiding eye contact with the man beside him. "Richard, R.H. It hit me like a freight train. Richard Hawthorne, billionaire founder of Hawthorne Industries, former CEO, now venture philanthropist and quiet investor. I'd read about him in Forbes, seen him once on a panel about sustainable development in architecture. And he was the man who had quietly supported me financially for nearly 2 years. Who exactly are you? To my granddaughter, Grandpa's voice held the edge of a man used to controlling a room. But it was wavering now. Richard's eyes didn't flinch. He didn't look at Grandpa. He didn't look at the rest of the stunned family members. He looked only at me. "I'm her father." A collective gasp escaped around the table. My grandmother dropped her fork with a sharp clang. One of my cousins let out a strangled, "What?" My heart pounded so loudly in my chest I was sure everyone could hear it. "No," I breathed. "That's not Ava," he said softly, his voice calm, deep, certain. "I've waited a long time to say that to you." I turned to my mother. "Is this true?" She blinked at me, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. "Ava, please, don't please me. Just answer me." She looked down, unable to meet my eyes. My hands were shaking. I looked back at Richard. "You can't just show up like this. Drop a line like that." "What the hell is going on?" He nodded slightly, understanding the enormity of what he'd done. I shouldn't have done it that way. But I was tired of hiding. Tired of waiting for permission to speak to my own daughter. "Daughter," I repeated, numb. Nancy finally spoke. Her voice was raw, unlike anything I'd heard from her before. "You weren't supposed to be here. Richard, you told me I had no place," he replied, his tone growing colder. "You made me sign away rights. You erased me from her life. And now, here she is, grown into everything I could have hoped for, and I had to watch from the sidelines." "You left," Nancy snapped. "You walked away. I was pushed out." He replied, "Don't twist it. Your father made it very clear that my presence would cost you everything: inheritance, support, a place in this family." I looked between them, my stomach in knots. Can someone explain to me why I never knew any of this silence? The most damning kind. "Mom," I pressed, "did you ever think I had the right to know?" Nancy's hands trembled now. "You were a baby. I did what I had to do to protect us." "No," I said flatly. "You did what you had to do to stay in their good graces." The air felt thick. My grandfather was glaring daggers at Richard. My grandmother was dabbing her lips with a napkin, refusing to look at anyone, and everyone else sat frozen, unsure where to look, what to say, whose side to be on. "I sent the money," Richard said gently. "Not just because I could, but because I should have. I should have been there. I know it doesn't fix the years I missed, but I wanted to make sure you had a safety net, that you could build something that was yours." The words should have comforted me, but all I could feel was confusion, anger, heartbreak. My entire identity had been built on a lie of omission. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I need air," I muttered, moving toward the hallway. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice crack. "Ava, wait." But I didn't. I walked out into the night, the cool air stinging my skin, my mind spinning in 1,000 directions. The man who had been a ghost in my life, nameless, faceless, absent, was suddenly real, breathing, sitting 2 chairs away, and he'd called me his daughter. Everything I thought I knew about my life had just shifted on its axis, and I had no idea how to make it stop spinning. I didn't get far, just out to the garden terrace, where the scent of late summer roses lingered in the hedges, sweet and cloying, like perfume sprayed over something rotten. My pulse thundered in my ears, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I leaned against a marble column, fighting the nausea rising in my throat. "Daughter." He said it so plainly, so casually, like he'd been rehearsing it for years. I don't know how long I stood there before the sound of the French doors creaking open pulled me back to the moment. "Ava." My mother's voice came behind me, breathless, frayed. "Please," I turned slowly, and for the first time in my adult life, I saw her not as the composed, tightly wound woman who raised me, but as someone cornered, afraid, exposed. "You lied to me," I said. My voice came out hollow. She looked away. "It wasn't that simple." "No," I stepped closer. "Because it seems pretty simple to me. You kept my father's identity a secret. You let me grow up thinking he abandoned us. You let your family treat me like an inconvenience while you played along. Why I was protecting you. From what? The truth." Her lips trembled. "From disappointment. From the complications that come with being tied to someone like him." I scoffed. "Someone who's apparently spent the last year and a half making sure I had enough to live on. Someone who knew me better from a distance than anyone at that table ever has. That's not fair." "No," I snapped. What's not fair is growing up surrounded by people who looked through me like I was a mistake. What's not fair is wondering why Grandpa always introduced the other grandkids with pride, but never me. What's not fair is being told never to ask about the other half of who I am because it would make things harder. For you. Nancy looked like I'd slapped her. You don't know what I went through. What we went through. Then tell me, I said sharply. Tell me everything, because clearly, the only one who's been in the dark my entire life is me. She exhaled slowly, deflating in front of me. When I got pregnant with you, I wasn't married. That alone was a scandal. Richard and I were complicated, and when my parents found out, they gave me an ultimatum: cut him off or lose everything. I folded my arms, and you chose everything. I chose survival, she said quietly. I was 22. I had no degree, no job, no means to raise a child. My father said he'd support me, but only if I agreed to sever ties with Richard permanently. He even had papers drawn up. Richard didn't want to sign, but eventually he did. We thought it was the only way to preserve your reputation. I muttered. Her voice cracked. Ava, I did the best I could. I raised you on my own. I stayed. I worked hard to give you a good life, but you lied. I said, you let me believe I wasn't wanted. Do you have any idea how that feels to grow up with a silent absence where a father should have been? Tears spilled over her cheeks. I didn't know he was still watching over you. I didn't know about the money. I didn't think he'd ever come back. I stepped back. I couldn't look at her anymore. From behind us, another voice cut in. Smooth, steady. I never stopped trying. Ava. I turned to see Richard standing at the edge of the terrace, hands in his pockets, eyes shaded with regret. I wrote letters. He said, hundreds. All sent back unopened. I called. She blocked me. I even tried to approach your grandfather. He told me if I didn't disappear, he'd make sure your mother lost custody. My mother stiffened. He was protecting the family. No, Richard said gently. He was protecting his name, not his daughter, not his granddaughter. The weight of it all pressed down on me. My life, my story was a mosaic made of missing pieces, and now, with those pieces dumped in front of me all at once, I wasn't sure how to arrange them anymore. Inside. Laughter erupted from someone in the dining room. False. Nervous. The performance continued without us. Why now, I asked Richard. Why show up tonight? Why make it public? He hesitated. Because I found out about the estate transfer. That your grandfather intends to leave everything to your cousin Luke, except for a single trust set aside for Ava's future housing, as if you were some charity case. And I couldn't stay silent anymore. What does that have to do with you? He took a step forward. Because the house he's leaving behind, the land it sits on, it was once mine. I sold it to him after your mother and I split, just to get out from under his thumb. And I want to make sure you get what's yours, not as an afterthought, as my daughter. My throat closed. I had no words left. Nancy sat down heavily on the bench beside the garden wall. She looked smaller somehow. I never thought it would come to this, she whispered. You mean the truth I said? She didn't respond. Richard reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. I didn't just come here with a toast, he said. I came with a proposal. Something I should have done years ago. I didn't open it. Not yet. Because I wasn't ready to read anything else written about my life without understanding how much of it had already been decided without me. I stood at the edge of the dining room, holding the unopened document Richard had handed me. My fingers pressed into the thick envelope like it might reveal something through sheer pressure alone. Inside, the party was still going. Polite conversations resumed with two bright smiles and hollow laughter. A room full of people pretending nothing monumental had just happened. But I had changed. The air felt different in my lungs, heavier, sharper. I stepped back inside. Chandeliers glinted overhead. Crystal caught candlelight and danced it across the walls. But everything felt artificial now, like someone had painted over rotting wood and called it luxury. The moment I entered, the room quieted again. I walked toward my place at the table, where my half-eaten filet mignon had gone cold. I stood behind my chair, looked around at the people who shared my blood, and realized how little I had in common with any of them. "I have something to say," I began. My voice was calm, clear. No one interrupted. I took a deep breath. For 32 years, I've lived my life under this family's watch. I've attended your functions, laughed at your jokes, stayed quiet when I was ignored because I thought if I worked hard enough, smiled politely enough, maybe you'd start to see me. I looked directly at my grandfather, but I realize now, you never wanted to see me. Not really. I was a complication, a problem to be managed. "Now, just a minute," he began. "No," I cut him off. "You don't get to speak yet." A murmur swept through the table, but no one challenged me. I turned to face the whole room. Tonight, a man you've all treated like an outsider stood up and revealed he's my father. And what did you do? You looked away. You pretended nothing had happened, because truth doesn't fit in your perfect little picture, does it? I unfolded the document Richard had given me. "It's a deed," I said, "to the Monroe West property, the one this entire estate was built on. Turns out it used to belong to Richard Hawthorne. He sold it under pressure to this family before he was forced out of my life." All eyes turned toward my grandfather now, whose jaw tightened like stone. Richard stepped forward. "I came tonight not to cause a scene, but because I realized the only way to reclaim what's mine and what should have been hers was to bring it into the light." "You were paid off," my grandfather hissed. "You agreed to walk away. I agreed to protect Nancy from being cut off." Richard replied, "Not to be erased. Not to watch my daughter grow up in a house where she was treated like a family secret. You had no place here. And yet," I said, "he's the only one who's seen me." My mother stood up, eyes red, hands shaking. "Ava, please, don't do this like them. Don't make a scene." I turned on her. "You mean like you did when you let them rewrite my whole existence?" Tears spilled down her cheeks, but I didn't soften. Richard stepped beside me. He was calm, but the steel in his voice was unmistakable. "For years, I sent letters that were never answered. I watched Ava's life from a distance. And when I finally learned she was struggling, I sent support not because she asked, but because it was the only way I could reach her." He turned to me now. "I wanted to wait until you were ready. But when I heard they were drawing up a will leaving everything to your cousin Luke and calling it a bloodline decision, I realized I'd waited long enough." Luke looked up, clearly flustered. "What does that mean, Grandpa?" "It means," I said, "that the entire legacy you've all been fighting to inherit was built on land that never belonged to you in the first place. It came from a man you refused to acknowledge, and the one person you treated like an outsider, I'm his heir." My grandfather slammed his fist on the table. "Enough, no," Richard said, his voice low but unyielding. "Now it's enough." The room fell silent again, and then Grandma, quiet, elegant, always 2 steps behind her husband, finally spoke. "We all knew," she said softly. "Even me. I knew Ava was his child, but we went along with it, because it was easier than standing up to you." Everyone stared at her. My grandfather turned to her in disbelief. "Vivian." She didn't look at him. "Don't act surprised. You made the rules. I just followed them." I looked at her, stunned. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" She hesitated. "Because I thought silence would protect you. It didn't." I said, "It only protected you." The weight of truth pressed down on everyone like a sudden shift in gravity. Richard spoke again. This isn't just about property or inheritance. It's about the truth. Ava deserves a seat at this table not out of pity or charity, but because she belongs here. I'm not sure I want that seat anymore, I said quietly. Not if I have to keep pretending I don't exist to fit into your narrative. I turned toward my grandfather. You always said this family was built on legacy, but legacy means nothing if it's based on lies. I won't be part of this performance anymore. With that, I walked around the table, placed the folded deed in front of him, and said, "Consider this the beginning of your reckoning." Then I looked at my mother one last time. You could have told me the truth. I might have forgiven you, but you let me live in a story that wasn't mine. And that I don't know how to come back from. She said nothing. Richard placed a hand gently on my back. Come on, let's go. As we walked toward the front door, no one stopped us. No one said goodbye. No one even breathed. And that silence, that pregnant, aching silence, was the most honest thing the Monroe family had ever produced. I didn't cry when we left. I didn't say goodbye. Didn't look back at the house that raised me but never welcomed me. Didn't pause under the golden archway where I used to wait for rides after school, thinking someday someone would pull up who saw me. That night, it was Richard who opened the passenger door of a black car and waited for me to get in. He didn't rush me. Didn't speak, just waited. We rode in silence for several blocks before he finally asked, "Do you want to talk? Or should we drive until the silence feels less like punishment?" I blinked, then laughed, bitterly. "Is that your idea of comfort? It's my idea of presence," he said. "I'm here. Ava, you lead." I stared out the window, watching Seattle's glittering skyline slip past. "It's like I've been grieving a father I never knew," I whispered. "And now I have to grieve a mother I thought I understood." Richard nodded slightly. Grief doesn't always need death. Sometimes betrayal is enough. We drove to a quiet rooftop lounge downtown, mostly empty at that hour. He didn't ask if I wanted to stop. I think he knew I didn't want to go home yet. We sat at a corner booth, each with a cup of tea neither of us drank. "I feel like I'm made of sand right now," I said after a long silence. "Like someone cracked the hourglass and everything I thought was holding me together is spilling out." "I know that feeling. Do you?" I challenged. He didn't flinch. "Yes, when your mother left, when I signed those papers, when I watched her walk away, carrying you, knowing I'd been erased before I'd even begun." I sat back. "So why didn't you fight harder?" His jaw tensed. "Because your grandfather made it clear that if I did, I wouldn't just lose access to you. Nancy would lose her home, her education, her name. He would cut her off completely. And she was young, scared. She begged me not to make things worse. I swallowed hard. And so you disappeared. I didn't stop watching, or caring. I stayed away because I thought that was the only way to protect you both. But that protection left a hole," I said. "And no one ever filled it. They just covered it up with more lies." He nodded, eyes full of regret. "I know, and I will never stop being sorry for that." His sincerity was hard to face. I wasn't used to men in my life showing softness without strings. I didn't know how to hold it. When I finally got home that night, I found 3 missed calls from my mother, a voicemail, 1 text. "Ava, I know you're angry, but please don't shut me out. I can explain everything. Just, please come home." Home. The word rang hollow now. That house had been a museum of denial, not a home. Still, the child in me wanted closure, so I texted her back. "Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Your place, the next afternoon." I walked into the Monroe estate for what I knew would be the last time. The house was too quiet. My mother sat in the sunroom, hands folded in her lap, her usual armor of elegance and composure visibly cracked. She stood when I entered. "Ava." I didn't hug her. "I'm here," I said flatly. "So talk." She sat back down, visibly shaken by my coldness. But she didn't argue. "I know you hate me right now. That's not strong enough a word. I never wanted this for you." She began. "Not the anger, not the distance. I wanted to protect you." "Stop using that word like it means something good," I snapped. "Protecting me would have meant giving me the truth, not letting me grow up thinking I was abandoned." Her voice broke. "I was trying to hold everything together." "No," I said. "You were trying to stay in the family, to stay comfortable. You let your father dictate what my life should look like, and you played along." Tears ran silently down her face. "I didn't think Richard would come back. I didn't think he'd still want you." My breath hitched. "Still want me," she faltered, realizing her wording. I didn't think there was room for all of us anymore. And that's when I realized it. She hadn't just lied because she was afraid of her father. She'd lied because part of her had hoped the past would stay buried, that she could rewrite the story and pretend the chapter with Richard never happened, that she could shape me into something more acceptable Monroe enough to survive. But I'd never been enough for them, and now I didn't want to be. I stood. "I'm not here for apologies, you don't mean. I'm here to say that I'm done. With the performances, with the pretending. You raised me to smile through pain, to make small talk while I bled inside. I won't do it anymore." She stood too, panicked. "You're cutting me off. I'm setting a boundary. There's a difference. And Richard, you trust him just like that." "No," I said. "But he showed up." "You didn't." I walked to the front door, then paused. "I don't know if I'll come back here again," I said without turning, "so take a good look now." And then I left. 3 weeks later, I signed a lease on a new studio downtown. Richard co-signed it, but made it clear the business would be mine to run, no strings, no oversight. "This isn't a buyout," he said. "It's a vote of confidence." I started Morgan Design Collective with my assistant Carla, and one new hire, a brilliant young architect who had also been rejected by legacy firms for not fitting in. I saw myself in her. Her hunger. Her pain. We built something beautiful together. I still hadn't seen my mother since that afternoon. She sent a few messages. A letter. I didn't respond. I needed time, space, distance from the version of me she helped create. But Richard, he kept showing up. Brunches, texts, quiet support when I didn't ask for it. He never tried to replace the past. He just stood in the present with me, one step at a time. One day, he brought me a photo I'd never seen me as a baby. In his arms, both of us smiling. The back read, "For the day she knows who I am." I cried for a long time. Then I framed it and placed it on my desk. Not because I was rewriting the story, but because finally, I was the one telling it. A month after the dinner, I no longer flinched at the sound of my mother's name. I didn't answer her calls, but I didn't shake when I saw her number anymore either. That, in itself, felt like a small miracle. The studio was coming together, concrete floors polished to a gleam, sketches pinned to corkboards, and sunlight pouring through tall windows like promise. For the first time in years, my business wasn't surviving, it was thriving. We landed a boutique hotel redesign in downtown Portland and 2 high-end residential projects within the first month. Clients came by referral, many through quiet introductions from Richard. He never flaunted it, never tried to take credit. He simply passed along a name and stepped back, letting me make the impression. "This isn't nepotism," he said once when I confronted him. "It's redirection, giving influence back to the person who deserves it, despite everything." I was still getting used to the word father in reference to him. We hadn't used labels. There was something sacred about allowing the relationship to form organically, without forcing a narrative. I wasn't ready to call him Dad, but I was beginning to call him mine. One Wednesday morning, as I reviewed sample boards with Carla. I received a call from Richard's attorney, a woman named Sandra Park. Her voice was calm and precise, the way you'd expect from someone who spent her life managing the estates of the wealthy. "Mr. Hawthorne asked me to loop you in on some developments," she said. "He's filed a formal claim to reverse the original land transaction involving the Monroe estate." I froze. "You mean the house?" "The land," she clarified. "He's contesting the legality of the sale made under coercion. There's documentation to support his claim, emails, letters, and audio recording. It won't be easy, but it's not impossible." "Why now?" "Because," she said, "he wants the Monroe name removed from property they never owned rightfully, and he intends to transfer the land title to you." My breath caught. "Wait, he's giving me the land?" Sandra didn't hesitate. "All of it. If the court rules in his favor, the estate becomes yours." I leaned back, trying to absorb the weight of that statement. The house I had once been unwelcome in might soon bear my name. "But why would he do this?" I asked quietly. "He doesn't need revenge." "No," Sandra agreed, "but he wants justice and legacy. He wants to give you something that no one can erase." When I called Richard later that day, he was calm. I debated it for weeks. He admitted, whether it was worth the noise, whether it would just make things harder for you. And then I remembered the look on your face that night when you realized how much had been stolen from you. Not just money, but history. Birthright. I can't undo the past, but I can correct the record. I didn't know what to say. So I said the only thing I truly meant: "Thank you." News of the legal action spread through the family like a brush fire in dry summer. I didn't hear it from my mother directly. It came from Claire, my cousin, who texted me one night out of nowhere. "They're losing it. Grandpa says Richard is trying to bankrupt the family. Grandma isn't speaking to anyone. Luke's freaking out. Honestly, I think you're the only one who ever scared them." I didn't respond, but I saved the message, because it was proof the illusion was cracking. That week, the Monroe Family Trust Fund was frozen pending review of the property claim. Luke's trust, the one he'd been boasting about for years, was tied directly to that land. And without the land, the funding collapsed. I heard whispers that Grandpa had begun liquidating art and collectibles to cover legal fees, that Grandma's prized European villa was quietly listed off-market. The family was hemorrhaging power, and they had no idea how to function without it. My mother, surprisingly, went quiet. No letters, no voicemails. Part of me wondered if she finally understood that words meant nothing without accountability. Or maybe she just knew I wouldn't come running this time. Instead, I focused on the things that were mine: the business, the projects, my clients, and my growing Sunday brunch tradition with Richard, who would show up at my place with a pastry box in one hand and an annotated newspaper in the other. We'd sit on my balcony, sipping coffee, talking about everything but the case. "I didn't want this to become your identity," he said one day. "The girl who took down the Monroes." "It won't," I assured him, "because I'm building something separate, something clean." He smiled, softly. "Then you've already won." Autumn came early that year. The leaves in Portland turned sharper shades of amber and blood orange than I ever remembered, as if the world itself was shedding layers, pushing out everything false to make room for something real. I was doing the same. The studio was thriving. We had a waiting list of clients. I finally hired a second full-time designer. Richard showed up once a week, never unannounced, never overbearing. He brought almond croissants, industry gossip, and an easy, steady kind of presence that made the air feel lighter. But it wasn't just the business that was growing. I was, too. Therapy helped. So did distance from my mother, from the estate, from the poisonous guilt I had worn like a second skin for most of my life. One day, I opened a drawer and found the stack of photos my mother used to keep hidden in her nightstand. Pictures of me as a baby, alone, a toddler, at birthday parties where no father stood behind the cake, a teenager, head down in every family portrait, as if I knew even then that I didn't quite belong. I spread them across the table, and for the first time, I didn't cry. Instead, I picked up a pen and began writing dates, notes, corrections. October 1991, Ava's first birthday. No one clapped during her song. June 1998, Ava's graduation from elementary school. Grandma left early. July 2023, Ava found her voice. Finally, I wasn't trying to rewrite history. I was reclaiming it. Ryan reached out first. We weren't close growing up. He was 4 years older, went to boarding school in Connecticut, and rarely came home for holidays. But after the lawsuit became public, he sent a single text. I've always known something was off. I'm sorry it was you who had to carry it. That was it. No preamble. No excuses. But it was the beginning. We met for coffee in Seattle a few weeks later. He was calmer than I remembered, less performative. Maybe losing the trust fund had forced him to build something real. I used to think you were lucky, he admitted over cappuccinos, because you didn't have to carry the weight of being the heir. I raised an eyebrow. You thought I was lucky. He laughed. Turns out being invisible is a different kind of burden. We talked for 2 hours that felt like 10 years collapsing in reverse. He told me he'd started a career coaching business for young finance grads, not the kind who want to work on Wall Street, he said, but the ones who want to escape it. I told him about the hotel project in Portland. He asked if he could come see it. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Caitlin reached out soon after. She'd just finished her 2nd year in grad school and had broken up with her long-term boyfriend. Her message was simple. I don't know what to believe anymore. But I believe you. She started visiting on weekends, helping at the studio, organizing samples and taking behind-the-scenes photos for our socials. She had a quiet talent for color theory and spacing, something I never knew about her. Or maybe never had the chance to know. One afternoon, as she stood at my drafting table, she said, "Do you ever feel like our whole childhood was a script someone else wrote all the time?" She looked at me. "Then I'm glad you tore it up." On the 1-year anniversary of that dinner, Richard and I hosted a small gathering at the studio. No press, no speeches, just a catered meal, soft jazz, and a group of people who had helped build something new from what was broken. Ryan came with his new girlfriend, a gentle, perceptive woman who asked thoughtful questions and didn't once mention his last name. Caitlin brought lemon tarts. Carla brought her dad, who immediately offered to fix a flickering light in the hallway. Richard gave a toast. It wasn't long, just a few words, to choosing truth over tradition, he said, and to building family not from obligation, but from love. Everyone raised their glasses. I looked around the room, the mismatched group of people who had walked with me through the storm. And for the first time in my life, I felt it fully. I belonged. Not because I had earned it, not because I had inherited it, but because I had created it. My mother didn't attend. She wasn't invited. But a few days later, she sent a package. No note. No signature, just a small leather box, and inside it, a delicate gold locket. I recognized it instantly. She used to wear it when I was young, then suddenly stopped around the time I turned 12. I opened it. Inside 2 photos, one of her, pregnant, the other of me as a baby in Richard's arms, on the inside hinge. One word was etched: truth. I didn't cry, but I kept it, not as forgiveness, but as evidence that maybe, even after everything, she was starting to see me, and maybe, for the first time in her life, she wanted to be seen, too. 2 years after the dinner that tore the silence wide open. I stood at the entrance of a newly completed boutique hotel my team had designed: glass, light wood, and soft brass accents that reflected the autumn sun like it had been waiting for this day. For me, the owners were thrilled. Guests filtered through, complimenting the space, the textures, the energy. My name was printed on a small brass plaque near the lobby entrance, interior design by Ava Monroe. No family name, no footnotes, just mine. After the event, Richard and I walked along the waterfront, coffee in hand. The breeze was crisp, clean. I was wearing one of his old scarves, gray cashmere, a gift he hadn't meant to become sentimental, but now wore memory like a second layer. "You did well," he said. I smiled. "We did." He nodded. "You know, if you'd told me 5 years ago that I'd get to walk beside you like this, I wouldn't have believed it. Neither would I admitted. But I'm glad we found our way here. I still hadn't used the word dad, but in moments like these, I didn't need to. A few weeks later, I received the final court ruling. The Monroe estate land, not just the house, was now mine. The judge ruled in Richard's favor, citing undue coercion in the original sale and long-term concealment of rightful ownership. The Monroes didn't contest the ruling, not publicly. At least, the estate was sold, the family scattered. Luke moved out of state. My grandparents downsized. My mother stayed silent. And I didn't move in. Instead, I donated the property to a nonprofit that builds transitional housing for women and children escaping generational abuse. The press called it a bold move. I called it a correction. Because no home built on erasure should be allowed to thrive. And no legacy rooted in shame deserved to endure. Today, my life is quiet. I wake early, paint on Sundays, host design and tea nights with Caitlin at the studio. Ryan helps small business owners write strategic plans over coffee instead of corporate dinners. We call each other siblings now without flinching. And Richard, he shows up every week, always on time, always present. He's teaching me to play chess. I'm terrible at it. He says I'm too emotional with my pieces, too quick to sacrifice to protect the ones I love. You can't save them all. He told me once. I know, I said, but I'm learning to choose who deserves saving. Sometimes. I still think about the girl I used to be, the one who tried to shrink herself small enough to fit in someone else's idea of family. She didn't know yet that love isn't earned by erasure. She didn't know that the ones who love you quietly might be the loudest when it matters most. She didn't know that sometimes the person you become after the truth breaks you is stronger than you ever imagined. My name is Ava Monroe. I am my father's daughter. But more than that, I am the author of my own story. And this legacy, it starts with me.